Have you ever watched someone destroy evidence right in front of you and realized years later that it was the biggest mistake they ever made? Because that's exactly what happened after my father's funeral. My sister thought she had burned every secret he left behind, every document, every record, every clue. She was wrong. She missed one envelope. And that single envelope destroyed the lie she had spent years building. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. The day we buried my father was one of the quietest days of my life. The sky was gray, the wind barely moved. Even the people attending seemed quieter than usual, as if everyone understood that a good man had just left this world. My father wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, but he was the kind of person people respected. He worked hard his entire life. He paid his bills on time. He kept his promises. And he believed that integrity mattered more than money. Growing up, there was one thing everyone knew about Dad. He organized everything. Every receipt, every tax return, every insurance policy, every bank statement. Everything had a place. He kept most of his important records in a large filing cabinet inside his home office. The cabinet was almost legendary in our family. Whenever someone needed paperwork, Dad somehow knew exactly where it was. "Third drawer, blue folder," he'd say. And somehow he'd always be right. That was just who he was. Which is why what happened after his funeral never made sense to me. At least not at first. My sister Melissa and I had never been particularly close. We weren't enemies, but we weren't friends either. Melissa always seemed to believe the world owed her something. If something good happened to someone else, she thought it should have happened to her. If Dad bought me a birthday gift, she'd complain hers wasn't expensive enough. If I got praised for something, she'd find a reason to tear it down. As we got older, the distance between us only grew. Dad tried to keep the family together, but even he couldn't fix everything. Still, during the funeral, Melissa appeared heartbroken. She cried, she hugged relatives, she thanked people for coming. At first glance, she looked like a grieving daughter. But looking back now, I realized something was off. She kept checking the time. She seemed distracted, restless, like she couldn't wait for the funeral to end. I didn't think much about it then. Grief affects everyone differently, or so I told myself. A few hours later, family members gathered at Dad's house. People were sharing stories, looking through old photographs, remembering better days. That's when Melissa suddenly stood up. "We need to clear out Dad's office," she announced. The room became quiet. Someone asked why. "It's what he would have wanted," she replied. "We should get rid of all the paperwork and start fresh." I remember frowning immediately. That didn't sound like Dad at all, not even a little. Dad never threw away important records. In fact, he saved everything, sometimes too much. But before anyone could really question her, Melissa was already heading toward the office. I followed behind. The moment she opened the filing cabinet, something strange happened. She didn't sort through anything. She didn't read anything. She didn't even look at most of it. She simply started pulling folders out by the handful and throwing them into cardboard boxes. Fast. Way too fast. As if she already knew exactly what she wanted. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Cleaning up? Today? Why not?" I stared at her, because it felt wrong. We hadn't even buried Dad 24 hours earlier, and she was acting like she was trying to erase his existence. She slammed another drawer shut. "You're overthinking this." Maybe she was right. Maybe grief was making me suspicious. But then she said something that really bothered me. "Most of this junk is worthless anyway." Junk. She called Dad's life records junk, the same records he'd spent decades organizing, the same records he protected more carefully than almost anything else. An uncomfortable feeling settled in my stomach. I couldn't explain it, but something wasn't right. By sunset, Melissa had filled multiple boxes. Then she carried them into the backyard. Several relatives followed, including me. At the far edge of the property sat an old metal burn barrel Dad used for yard debris years ago. Melissa dumped the first box inside, then another. then another. Before I fully realized what was happening, she struck a lighter. The papers ignited almost instantly. Orange flames climbed into the evening sky. Page after page disappeared. Tax documents, letters, financial records, personal files. Gone. Just like that. I stepped forward. "Melissa, stop." She ignored me. "Seriously, stop. We should look through those first." Her eyes snapped toward me. For a brief moment, I saw something unexpected. Not sadness, not grief. Fear. Then it vanished. "You think I'm stealing something?" she asked. The sudden hostility caught me off guard. "I didn't say that." "But you're thinking it." Several relatives exchanged nervous looks. Nobody wanted a fight, especially not after a funeral. I lowered my voice. "I just think Dad would have wanted us to review everything first." Melissa laughed, a sharp, bitter laugh. "You always think you know what Dad wanted." The argument ended there, mostly because nobody wanted to make the situation worse. But as the flames continued consuming box after box, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching something important disappear. Something Dad would never have wanted destroyed. Over the next few days, things became even stranger. Melissa practically took control of the entire estate overnight. She changed locks, she redirected mail, she handled phone calls. She refused to discuss finances. Whenever anyone asked questions, she gave the same answer. Dad didn't leave much. Then she'd quickly change the subject. At first, people accepted it, but I started noticing inconsistencies, little things, questions she avoided, details she couldn't explain. The more I paid attention, the more nervous she seemed. And the more nervous she seemed, the more suspicious I became. One afternoon, about a week after the funeral, I returned to Dad's property to clean out the garage. Melissa wasn't there. For the first time in days, I could work without being watched. The garage looked exactly the way Dad had left it. Tools hanging neatly on walls, shelves organized by size and purpose, everything in its proper place. For a moment, I could almost imagine he was still alive. I spent hours sorting through old equipment. The work helped distract me from the grief. Then something unexpected happened. While moving a stack of storage bins, I noticed an old metal toolbox shoved deep behind a shelf. I'd never seen it before. Dust covered every inch of it. The box looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Curious, I pulled it out. The latch resisted at first, then clicked open. Inside were a few old tools, nothing unusual. But beneath them sat a large, sealed envelope. My heart immediately started beating faster, because I recognized the handwriting. It was Dad's. Written across the front were 7 words. "For the one who still looks for the truth." I froze. The garage suddenly felt silent, completely silent, as if the entire world had stopped moving. Slowly, I picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have. My hands were shaking. Dad had hidden this, not misplaced it, not forgotten it, hidden it. And somehow Melissa had missed it. I carefully broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small brass key. I unfolded the letter. The first line made my blood run cold. "If you're reading this, someone has already tried to destroy what I left behind." And in that moment, I realized the fire behind Dad's house hadn't been an act of grief. It had been an act of desperation. The question was, what was my sister so desperate to hide? For several seconds, I couldn't move. I just stood there in the garage staring at Dad's letter. The words seemed impossible. "If you're reading this, someone has already tried to destroy what I left behind." Not might, not could, had. Dad sounded certain, as if he had expected it, as if he had known exactly what would happen after he was gone. My eyes moved down the page. The letter wasn't long. Dad had always been a man of few words, but every sentence felt important. He wrote that some truths needed protection. He wrote that appearances could be deceiving. And most importantly, he instructed me to use the brass key to open a storage unit located across town. The unit number was written at the bottom of the page, along with one final sentence. Trust facts, not feelings. That sounded exactly like him. Dad believed facts mattered, evidence mattered, truth mattered, no matter how uncomfortable it was. I looked down at the brass key resting in my palm. The metal felt cold. Suddenly, the strange behavior I'd witnessed over the past week started replaying in my head. Melissa rushing to destroy paperwork, Melissa refusing to answer questions, Melissa taking control of everything, Melissa acting terrified whenever anyone mentioned finances. For the first time, I began wondering if Dad had been trying to warn me. The next morning, I drove across town. The storage facility sat near an industrial area filled with warehouses and trucking companies. Nothing about it looked special, just rows of metal doors behind a chain-link fence. The manager checked the unit number and asked for identification. When I explained who my father was, he nodded. Your dad was here regularly. That surprised me. Recently? The manager thought for a moment. A strange feeling settled over me. Dad had been visiting this place while he was sick, while none of us knew what he was planning. The manager handed me access paperwork. A few minutes later, I stood in front of the unit. The brass key slid smoothly into the lock, almost like it had been waiting for me. I took a deep breath, then opened the door. The sight inside stopped me cold. Boxes, dozens of them, carefully labeled and neatly stacked. Exactly the way Dad organized everything. Nothing looked random, nothing looked rushed. This wasn't storage, this was a backup plan. I stepped inside. The first box contained bank statements. The second held tax records. The third contained folders organized by year. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Then I noticed something unusual. Several folders had the same name written across them, Melissa. My stomach tightened. I carried one of the folders to a nearby table and opened it. Inside were photocopies of checks, bank transfers, account records, handwritten notes. At first, the information seemed confusing. Then patterns started appearing. Small withdrawals, a few $100s here, a few hundred there. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. But over time, the amounts increased. Thousands, then tens of thousands. The dates stretched back years. I stared at the numbers. Surely there had to be some explanation. Maybe Dad had loaned Melissa money. Maybe these were gifts. Maybe there was context I didn't understand. Then I found Dad's notes. His handwriting filled multiple pages. Every transaction was documented, every discrepancy recorded, every concern explained. The more I read, the worse it became. Dad hadn't authorized many of the withdrawals. In fact, he had spent years quietly investigating them. I sat down. My hands were trembling. Because the evidence pointed toward something I never imagined. Someone had been taking money from Dad. And according to his records, that person was Melissa. At first, the amounts were small enough to go unnoticed. Then larger. Then much larger. Dad had discovered credit accounts opened without permission. Charges he never made. Loans connected to signatures he claimed weren't his. Yet, instead of exposing Melissa publicly, he documented everything. Page after page, year after year. I found one journal entry that nearly broke my heart. Dad wrote, "I keep hoping she'll stop." That was it. One sentence, simple, painful, devastating. Because it revealed exactly how much he loved her. Even after everything. Even after being betrayed, he still hoped she'd change. I continued reading for hours. The picture became clearer. Dad knew far more than anyone realized, and he had been preparing for something. Every document seemed organized toward a single purpose: protection. Not for himself, for the truth. Late that afternoon, I discovered another box. Unlike the others, it carried a handwritten label. Personal. Inside were journals, letters, private notes. The contents painted an even more painful picture. Dad had spent years struggling with what to do. He loved Melissa, but he no longer trusted her. Again and again, he described feeling torn between protecting his daughter and protecting what he had worked his entire life to build. Then I found a document that changed everything. It was dated only months before his death. A legal notice. Attached to it were several signed forms. I read them twice, then a third time. My heart started racing. Dad had changed his estate plan. The inheritance Melissa expected was gone. The arrangements had been completely revised. Suddenly, everything made sense. The fire, the urgency, the destroyed records. Melissa hadn't been acting out of grief. She had been acting out of panic. If these documents were real, then she stood to lose everything she thought she would inherit. I leaned back in my chair. The entire situation felt unreal. For years, I had believed my sister was selfish. But this was something else entirely. This was calculated, intentional. And if she knew these documents existed, it explained why she wanted them destroyed before anyone could find them. A loud sound outside startled me. I looked through the unit doorway. A car had pulled into the facility. For a brief moment, my pulse spiked. But it wasn't Melissa, just another customer. Still, the incident reminded me of something important. If Melissa had burned paperwork once, what would she do if she discovered this place? I spent the next several days reviewing records, copying documents, photographing evidence, creating backups. The deeper I dug, the more information I uncovered. And the more information I uncovered, the angrier Melissa became. Because somehow she knew I was investigating. The first phone call came 3 days later. "What are you doing?" she demanded. I kept my voice calm. "What do you mean?" People are asking questions. Questions. Interesting choice of words. Not accusations, not lies. Questions. The kind questions people ask when something doesn't add up. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play games with me." Then she hung up. The second call was worse. She accused me of trying to steal the estate. The third call included threats. By then, I understood something important. Innocent people usually welcome facts. Guilty people fear them. Family members slowly began taking sides. Some believed Melissa. Others started noticing inconsistencies. The tension spread through the entire family. Holiday group chats became arguments. Phone calls turned into debates. Everyone seemed to sense that something larger was happening beneath the surface. And they were right. Because I still hadn't found Dad's final secret. That discovery came 1 week later. Near the back of the storage unit stood a small, locked cabinet I hadn't opened yet. The key wasn't difficult to find. Dad had taped it underneath a shelf. Inside the cabinet sat a single box. Nothing else, just one box, carefully sealed. On top was another note written in Dad's handwriting. My chest tightened. The message contained only one sentence. "Watch this when you're ready." Beneath the note was a flash drive. I stared at it for several moments, then plugged it into my laptop. A video file appeared. The timestamp showed it had been recorded only a few months before Dad died. Suddenly, my mouth felt dry. I clicked play. The screen flickered, then Dad appeared. Older, thinner, weaker than I remembered, but unmistakably Dad. For a moment, he simply looked into the camera, as if he knew exactly who would eventually watch. Then he spoke, and the very first sentence made my blood run cold. "If you're watching this," he said quietly, "Melissa has already done exactly what I feared she would do." And that's when I realized the biggest revelation was still waiting for me. My finger froze above the keyboard. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. Dad's face filled the monitor, older, tired, but calm. Almost as if he had already accepted everything that was coming. And then he repeated the words that had sent a chill through my entire body. "If you're watching this, Melissa has already done exactly what I feared she would do." The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. I leaned closer. Dad took a slow breath before continuing. "I hoped I was wrong." His voice was steady. "I prayed I was wrong." He lowered his eyes for a moment. But if this recording is being viewed, then someone tried to destroy evidence after my death. Evidence. Not paperwork, not records. Evidence. The choice of words mattered. Dad always chose his words carefully. He looked directly into the camera. I don't want revenge against anyone. That sounded exactly like him. Even now, even after everything. I only want the truth protected. I felt a lump form in my throat. Dad wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He was heartbroken. That was somehow worse. The video continued. For nearly an hour, Dad explained everything. The missing money, the unauthorized accounts, the forged signatures, the years of documentation. Every suspicion, every discovery, every painful realization. And through it all, one thing became painfully clear. Dad hadn't been gathering evidence to punish Melissa. He had been gathering evidence because nobody else would believe him otherwise. She was his daughter. People would assume he was confused, or mistaken, or exaggerating. So he documented everything, every transaction, every statement, every inconsistency. He built a mountain of facts. Then came the part that changed everything. Dad reached beside him and held up a large envelope. My heart immediately started racing, because I recognized it, not the exact envelope, but the type. The same kind of envelope I had discovered hidden inside the toolbox. Dad placed it on the table. If Melissa finds this, she'll destroy it. The certainty in his voice was terrifying. No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. So I created backups. A sad smile crossed his face. Several backups. For the first time since the video started, I almost laughed. Because that was Dad, the most organized man I'd ever known. Even betrayal couldn't stop him from planning ahead. Dad explained that months before his death, he met with attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors. He reviewed everything, updated everything, verified everything. Most importantly, he created a completely new estate plan. One designed specifically to survive interference. One designed to survive destruction. One designed to survive Melissa. Then he looked directly into the camera again. If you're seeing this, then the truth still exists somewhere. Those words hit me hard. Because he was right. The truth still existed. I was sitting in a storage unit surrounded by it. Dad continued, "The documents you need are legally protected." My pulse quickened. They've already been filed and recorded. Suddenly I understood. The papers Melissa burned weren't the originals. She thought she was destroying evidence, but she had only destroyed copies. Dad had anticipated everything. The realization was almost unbelievable. All those years, people thought he was simply being organized. In reality, he had been building a safety net that would activate after his death. Then came the final message, the one that nearly broke me. Dad's eyes softened. "If Melissa is watching this with you someday," he paused, "tell her I never stopped loving her." I had to look away from the screen, because tears were already forming. After everything she'd done, after every betrayal, after every lie, he still loved her. That was who my father was. The video ended moments later. The screen went black. And for a long time, I sat there in silence, not thinking about money, not thinking about inheritance, thinking about Dad, thinking about how much pain he must have carried, thinking about how lonely he must have felt, and thinking about how hard he worked to protect the truth. Eventually, I gathered every document, every journal, every recording, every piece of evidence. Then I contacted the attorney whose name appeared in Dad's records. The meeting took place 3 days later. I expected skepticism, questions, doubt. Instead, the attorney listened quietly. Then he nodded. "We've been expecting this." I blinked. "What?" He opened a file cabinet. Inside sat multiple folders. Copies, certified copies, official copies. Everything Dad had described. The attorney folded his hands. "Your father was very thorough. That might have been the understatement of the century. Over the next several weeks, legal reviews began. Financial records were examined, estate documents were verified, bank statements were cross-checked. And one by one, Melissa's claims started collapsing. At first, she denied everything. Then she blamed misunderstandings. Then she blamed paperwork errors. Then she blamed Dad. Every explanation changed. Every story shifted. And each new lie created another contradiction. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. Family members who had supported her began backing away. Not because anyone convinced them, because the facts convinced them. Eventually, relatives started calling me. Not to argue, to apologize. Many admitted they had doubted me. Some admitted they thought grief had made me paranoid. Others confessed they believed Melissa's version because it sounded easier. The truth often isn't easy, but eventually it catches up, and it finally caught up with Melissa. When the legal process concluded, Dad's actual wishes were carried out exactly as he intended. The revised estate plan stood. The protections worked. The backups worked. Everything worked. Melissa lost the control she had fought so hard to keep. The inheritance was distributed according to Dad's instructions. Several charitable donations were made in his name. Family keepsakes went where he wanted them to go. And the truth became part of the official record. Ironically, the act that hurt Melissa the most wasn't the investigation. It wasn't the evidence. It wasn't even the legal outcome. It was the fire. Because the moment she burned those papers, she revealed something. People couldn't stop asking the same question. Why destroy documents unless you're afraid of what's inside them? Her actions became the strongest evidence of all. Months passed, then nearly a year. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as life can be after losing a parent. One quiet afternoon, I visited Dad's grave. The cemetery looked different than it had on the day of the funeral. Brighter, peaceful. The heavy storm clouds were gone. Birds sang from nearby trees. The wind moved gently through the grass. I stood there holding a small envelope, not the original. That was secured safely elsewhere. Just an empty envelope, a reminder, a symbol. I placed it beside the flowers, then smiled. Because the object itself wasn't important. What it represented was truth, preparation, integrity, everything Dad believed in. I thought about Melissa. I thought about the choices she had made, and for the first time, I felt no anger, no desire for revenge, no bitterness, only clarity. Because real revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's not revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply allowing the truth to stand on its own. Dad understood that better than anyone. He never screamed, never fought, never sought revenge. He just prepared. He trusted facts. And eventually the facts spoke for themselves. As I turned to leave, my eyes drifted toward the flowers one last time, and I couldn't help thinking about how close Melissa had come. She burned thousands of pages, destroyed countless records, and spent years trying to control the story. Yet despite all of that, she missed one envelope, one forgotten envelope hidden inside an old toolbox, one envelope that survived the fire, one envelope that exposed every lie, one envelope that changed everything. And in the end, the truth outlived the flames, just like Dad knew it would.